The load was complete, and Ivan, jumping down, took his gentle fat horse by the bridle, and joined the file of telyagas going into the village. The young woman threw her rake on top of the load, and, swinging her arms, joined the other women who had collected in a group to sing. These women, with rakes on their shoulders and dressed in bright colors, suddenly burst forth into song with loud, happy voices as they followed the carts. One wild, untrained voice would sing a verse of pyesna, or folk song, and when she had reached the refrain, 50 other young, fresh, and powerful voices would take it up simultaneously and repeat it to the end. The peasant women, singing their folk song, came toward Levin, and it seemed to him that a cloud, freighted with the thunder of gaiety, was moving down upon him. The thunder cloud drew near, it took possession of him, and the haycock on which he was reclining, and the other haycocks, and the carts, and the whole meadow, and the far-off field, moved and swayed to the rhythm of this wild song, with its accompaniment of whistles and shrill cries and clapping of hands. The wholesome gaiety filled him with envy. He would have liked to take part in this expression of joyous life, but nothing of the sort could he do, and he was obliged to lie still, and look and listen. When the throng with their song had passed out of sight and hearing, an oppressive feeling of melancholy came over him at the thought of his loneliness, of his physical indolence, of the hostility which existed between him and this alien world. Some of these very muzhiks, even those who had quarrelled with him about the hay, or those whom he had injured, or those who had intended to cheat him, saluted him gaily as they passed, and evidently did not and could not bear him any malice, or feel any remorse, or even remembrance that they had tried to defraud him. All was swallowed up and forgotten in this sea of joyous universal labour. God gave the day, God gave the strength, and the day and the strength consecrated the labour and yielded their own reward. For whom was the work? What would be the fruits of the work? These were secondary, unimportant considerations. Levin had often looked with interest at this life, had often experienced a feeling of envy of the people that lived this life, but today, for the first time, especially under the impression of what he had seen in the bearing of Ivan Parmenov toward his young wife, he had clearly realized that it depended upon himself whether he would exchange the burdensome, idle, artificial, selfish existence which he led, for the laborious, simple, pure and delightful life of the peasantry. The elder who had been sitting with him had already gone home. The people were scattered. The neighboring villagers had already reached their houses, but those who lived at a distance were preparing to spend the night in the meadow and were getting ready for supper. Levin, without being noticed by the people, still reclined on the haycock, looking, listening, and thinking. The peasantry gathered in the meadow scarcely slept through the short summer night. At first gay gossip and laughter were heard while they were eating. Then followed songs and jests again. No trace of all the long, laborious day was left upon them, except its happiness. Just before the dawn there was silence everywhere. Nothing could be heard but the nocturnal sounds of the frogs ceaselessly croaking in the marsh, and the horses whinnying as they waited in the mist that rose before the dawn. Coming to himself, Levin got up from the haycock and, looking at the stars, saw that the night had gone. "Well, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this?" he asked himself, trying to give a shape to the thoughts and feelings that had occurred to him during this short night. All that he had thought and felt had taken 3 separate directions. First, it seemed to him that he must renounce his former mode of life, which was useful neither to himself nor to anyone else. This renunciation seemed to him very attractive and was easy and simple. The second direction that his thoughts and feelings took referred especially to the new life which he longed to lead. He clearly realized the simplicity, purity, and regularity of this new life, and was convinced that he should find in it that satisfaction, that calmness and mental freedom, which he now felt the lack of so painfully. The third line of thought brought him to the question how he should effect the transition from the old life to the new, and in this regard nothing clear presented itself to his mind. I must have a wife. I must engage in work, and have the absolute necessity of work. Shall I abandon Pokrovskoye? Buy land? Join the commune? Marry a peasant woman? How can I do all this? He again asked himself, and no answer came. However, he went on, in his self-communings, I have not slept all night, and my ideas are not very clear. I shall reduce them to order by and by. One thing is certain. This night has settled my fate. All my former dreams of family existence were rubbish. But all this is vastly simpler and better. How lovely, he thought as he gazed at the delicate white curly clouds, coloured like mother of pearl, which floated in the sky above him. How charming everything has been this lovely night. And when did that shell have time to form? I have been looking this long time at the sky, and yet nothing was to be seen, only 2 white streaks. Yes, thus, without my knowing it, my views about life have been changed. He left the meadow and walked along the highway that led to the village. A cool breeze began to blow, and it became grey and melancholy. The sombre moment was at hand which generally precedes the dawn, the perfect triumph of light over the darkness. Shivering with the chill, Levin walked fast, looking at the ground. What is that? Who is coming? He asked himself, hearing the sound of bells. He raised his head. About 40 paces from him he saw, coming toward him on the highway, on the grassy edge where he himself was walking, a travelling carriage drawn by 4 horses. The post-horses, to avoid the ruts, pressed close against the pole, but the skilful postilion, seated on one side of the box, kept the pole directly over the rut, so that the wheels kept only on the smooth surface of the road. Levin was so interested in this that, without thinking who might be coming, he only glanced heedlessly at the carriage. In one corner of the carriage an elderly lady was asleep, and by the window sat a young girl, evidently only just awake, holding with both hands the ribbons of her white bonnet. Serene and thoughtful, filled with a lofty, complex life, which Levin could not understand, she was gazing beyond him at the glow of the morning sky. At the very instant that this vision flashed by him he caught a glimpse of her frank eyes. She recognized him, and a gleam of joy, mingled with wonder, lightened up her face. He could not be mistaken. Only she in all the world had such eyes. In all the world there was only one being who could concentrate for him all the light and meaning of life. It was she. It was Kitty. He judged that she was on her way from the railway station to Yergoshovo. And all the thoughts that had occupied Levin through his sleepless night, all the resolutions that he had made, vanished in a twinkling. Horror seized him as he remembered his dream of marrying a Krestyanka, a peasant wife. In that carriage which flashed by him on the other side of the road and disappeared was the only possible answer to his life's enigma which had tormented and puzzled him so long. She was now out of sight. The rumble of the wheels had ceased, and scarcely could he hear the bells. The barking of the dogs told him that the carriage was passing through the village, and now there remained only the empty fields, the distant village, and himself an alien and a stranger to everything, walking solitary on the deserted highway. He looked at the sky, hoping to find there still the sea-shell cloud which he had admired, and which personified for him the movement of his thoughts and feelings during the night. But in the sky there was nothing that resembled the shell. There, at immeasurable heights, that mysterious change had already taken place. There was no trace of the shell, but in its place there extended over a good half of the heavens a carpet of cirrus clouds sweeping on and sweeping on. The sky was growing blue and luminous, and with the same tenderness and also with the same unsatisfactoriness it answered his questioning look. No, he said to himself, however good this simple and laborious life may be, I cannot bring myself to it. I love her. No one except Alexey Alexandrovitch's most intimate friends suspected that this apparently cold and sober-minded man had one weakness absolutely contradictory to the general consistency of his character. He could not look with indifference at a child or a woman who was weeping. The sight of tears caused him to lose his self-control, and destroyed for him his reasoning faculties. The manager of his chancellery and his secretary understood this, and warned women who came to present petitions not to allow their feelings to overcome them unless they wanted to injure their prospects. "He will fly into a passion and will not listen to you," they said. And it was a fact that the trouble which the sight of weeping caused Alexey Alexandrovitch was expressed by hasty irritation. I cannot do anything for you. Please leave me," he would exclaim, as a general thing, in such cases. When, on their way back from the races, Anna confessed her relations with Vronsky, and, immediately afterwards covering her face with her hands, burst into tears, Alexey Alexandrovitch, in spite of his anger against his wife, was conscious at the same time of that deep, soul-felt emotion welling up which the sight of tears always caused him. Knowing this, and knowing that any expression of it would be incompatible with the situation, he endeavored to restrain any sign of agitation, and therefore he neither moved nor looked at her. Hence arose that strange appearance of death-like rigidity in his face which so impressed Anna. When they reached home, he helped her from the carriage, and having made a great effort, he left her with ordinary politeness, saying only those words which would not oblige him to follow any course. He simply said that on the morrow he would let her know his decision. His wife's words, confirming his worst suspicions, caused a keen pain in his heart, and this pain was made still keener by the strange sensation of physical pity for her, caused by the sight of her tears. Yet as he sat alone in his carriage, Alexey Alexandrovitch, to his surprise and pleasure, was conscious of an absolute freedom, not only from that sense of pity, but also from the doubts and the pangs of jealousy which had of late been tormenting him. He experienced the feelings of a man who has been suffering for a long time from a toothache. After one terrible moment of agony, and the sensation of something enormous, greater than the head itself, which is wrenched out of the jaw, the patient, hardly able to believe in his good fortune, suddenly discovers that the pain that has been poisoning his life so long has ceased, and that he can live and think and interest himself in something besides his aching tooth. This feeling Alexey Alexandrovitch now experienced. The pain had been strange and terrible, but now it was over. He felt that he could live again, and think of something besides his wife. Without honor, without heart, without religion, an abandoned woman. I have always known this, and I have always seen it, though out of pity for her I tried to shut my eyes to it, he said to himself. And it really seemed to him that he had always seen this. He recalled many details of their past lives, and things which had once seemed innocent in his eyes now clearly came up as proofs that she had always been corrupt. I made a mistake when I joined my life to hers, but my mistake was not my fault, and therefore I ought not to be unhappy. I am not the guilty one, said he, but she is. But I have nothing more to do with her. She does not exist for me. All that would befall her as well as his son, toward whom also his feelings underwent a similar change, now ceased to occupy him. The only thing that did occupy him now was the question how to make his escape from this wretched crisis in a manner at once wise, correct, and honorable for himself, and having cleared himself from the mud with which she had spattered him by her fall, how he would henceforth pursue his own path of honorable, active, and useful life. Must I make myself wretched because a wretched woman has committed a crime? All I want is to find the best way out from this situation to which she has brought me, and I will find it, he added, getting more and more indignant. I am not the first, nor the last. And not speaking of the historical examples, beginning with La Belle Helene of Menelaus, which had recently been brought to all their memories by Offenbach's opera, Alexey Alexandrovitch went over in his mind a whole series of contemporary episodes, where husbands of the highest position had been obliged to mourn the faithlessness of their wives. Daryelov, Poltavsky, Prince Karabanov, Count Paskudin, Dram, yes, even Dram, honorable, industrious man as he is, Semenoff, Shagin, Sagonin, admit that they cast unjust ridicule on these men. As for me, I never saw anything except their misfortune, and I always pitied them," said Alexey Alexandrovitch to himself, although this was not so, and he had never sympathized with misfortune of this sort, and had only plumed himself the more as he had heard of wives deceiving their husbands. "This is a misfortune which is likely to strike any one, and now it has struck me. The only thing is to know how to find the best way of settling the difficulty." And he began to recall the different ways in which these men, finding themselves in such a position as he was, had behaved. Daryelov fought a duel. Dueling had been a subject of consideration to Alexey Alexandrovitch when he was a young man, and for the reason that physically he was a timid man, and he knew it. He could not think without a shudder of having a pistol levelled at him, and never in his life had he practised with firearms. This instinctive horror had in early life caused him often to think about dueling, and to imagine himself to expose his life to this danger. Afterward, when he had attained success and a high social position, he had got out of the way of such thoughts, but his habit of mind now reasserted itself, and his timidity, owing to his cowardice, was so great that Alexey Alexandrovitch long deliberated about the matter, turning it over on all sides, and questioning the expediency of a duel, although he knew perfectly well that in any case he would never fight. "Undoubtedly the state of our society is still so savage," he said, "though it is not so in England, that very many—" and in these many, to whom such a solution was satisfactory, there were some for whose opinions Alexey Alexandrovitch had the very highest regard. "Looking at the duel from its good side, to what result does it lead? Let us suppose that I send a challenge." And Alexey Alexandrovitch went on to draw a vivid picture of the night that he would spend after the challenge, and he imagined the pistol aimed at him and shuddered, and realized that he could never do such a thing. "Let us suppose that I challenge him to a duel. Let us suppose that I learn how to shoot," he forced himself to think. "That I am standing, that I pull the trigger," he said to himself, shutting his eyes, "and it happens that I kill him." He shook his head, to drive away these absurd notions. What sense would there be in causing a man's death, in order to settle my relations to a sinful woman and her son? Even then I should have to decide what I ought to do with her. But suppose, and this is vastly more likely to happen, that I am the one killed or wounded. I, an innocent man, the victim, killed or wounded? Still more absurd. But, moreover, would not the challenge to a duel on my part be a dishonorable action, certain as I am beforehand that my friends would never allow me to fight a duel? Would never permit the life of a government official, who is so indispensable to Russia, to be exposed to danger? What would happen? This would happen, that I, knowing in advance that the matter would never result in any danger, should seem to people to be anxious to win notoriety by a challenge. It would be dishonorable. It would be false. It would be an act of deception to others and to myself. A duel is not to be thought of, and no one expects it of me. My sole aim should be to preserve my reputation, and not to suffer any unnecessary interruption of my activity. The service of the state, always important in the eyes of Alexey Alexandrovitch, now appeared to him of extraordinary importance. Having decided against the duel, Alexey Alexandrovitch began to discuss the question of divorce, a second expedient which had been employed by several of the men whom he had in mind. Calling to mind all the well-known examples of divorce, and there had been many in the very highest circles of society, as he well knew, he could not name a single case where the aim of the divorce had been such as he proposed. The husband in each case had sold or given up the faithless wife, and the guilty party, who had no right to a second marriage, had entered into relations, imagined to be sanctioned, with a new husband. Alexey Alexandrovitch saw that, in his case at least, legal divorce, whereby the faithless wife would be repudiated, was impossible. He saw that the complicated conditions of his life precluded the possibility of those coarse proofs which the law demanded for the establishment of a wife's guilt. he saw that the distinguished refinement of his life precluded the public use of such proofs, even if they existed, and that the public use of these proofs would cause him to fall lower in public opinion than the guilty wife. Divorce could only end in a scandalous lawsuit, which would be a godsend to his enemies and to lovers of gossip, and would disgrace him from his high position in society. His principal object, the determination of his position with the least possible confusion, would not be attained by a divorce. Divorce, moreover, broke off all intercourse between wife and husband, and united her to her paramour. Now in Alexey Alexandrovitch's heart, in spite of the scornful indifference which he affected to feel toward his wife, there still remained one very keen sentiment, and that was his unwillingness for her, unhindered, to unite her lot with Vronsky, so that her fault would turn out to her advantage. This possible contingency was so painful to Alexey Alexandrovitch that, merely at the thought of it, he bellowed with mental pain, and he got up from his seat, changed his place in the carriage, and for a long time, darkly scowling, wrapped his woolly plaid about his thin and chilly legs. "Besides formal divorce," he said to himself, as, growing a little calmer, he continued his deliberations, "it would be possible to act as Karabanoff, Paskudin, and that gentle Dram have done. That is to say, I could separate from my wife." But this measure had almost the same disadvantages as the other. It was practically to throw his wife into Vronsky's arms. "No, it is impossible, impossible," he said aloud, again trying to wrap himself up in his plaid. "I cannot be unhappy, but neither she nor he ought to be happy." The feeling of jealousy which had tormented him while he was still ignorant had passed away when by his wife's words the aching tooth had been pulled, but this feeling was replaced by a different one, the desire not only that she should not triumph, but that she should receive the reward for her sin. He did not express it, but in the depths of his soul he desired that she should be punished for the way in which she had destroyed his peace and honor. After once more passing in review the conditions of the duel, the divorce, and the separation, and once more rejecting them, Alexey Alexandrovitch came to the conclusion that there was only one way to escape from his trouble, and that was to keep his wife under his protection, shielding his misfortune from the eyes of the world, employing all possible means to break off the illicit relationship, and, above all, though he did not avow it to himself, punishing his wife's fault. "I must let her know that, in the cruel situation into which she has brought our family, I have come to the conclusion that the status quo is the only way that seems advisable for both sides, and that I will agree to preserve it under the strenuous condition that she, on her part, fulfill my will, and break off all relations with her paramour." For the bolstering of this resolution when once he had finally adopted it, Alexey Alexandrovitch brought up one convincing argument. "Only by acting in this manner do I conform absolutely with the law of religion," said he to himself. "Only by this reasoning do I refuse to send away the adulterous woman, and I give her the chance of amending her ways, and likewise, painful as it will be to me, I consecrate a part of my powers to her regeneration and salvation." Though Alexey Alexandrovitch knew that he could have no moral influence over his wife, and that the attempts which he should make to reform his wife would have no other outcome than falsehood, although during the trying moments that he had been living he had not for an instant thought of finding his guidance in religion, yet now, when he felt that his determination was in accordance with religion, this religious sanction of his resolution gave him full comfort and a certain share of satisfaction. He was consoled with the thought that in such a trying period of his life no one would have the right to say that he had not acted in conformity to the religion whose banner he bore aloft in the midst of coolness and indifference. As he went over in his mind the remotest contingencies, Alexey Alexandrovitch even saw no reason why his relations with his wife should not remain pretty much as they had always been. Of course, it would be impossible for him to feel great confidence in her, but he saw no reason why he should ruin his whole life, and suffer personally, because she was a bad and faithless wife. "Yes, time will pass," he said to himself, "time which solves all problems, and our relations will be brought into the old order, so that I shall not feel the disorder that has broken up the current of my life. She must be unhappy, but I am not to blame, and so I do not see why I must be unhappy too. Alexey Alexandrovitch, during his drive back to Petersburg, not only fully decided on the line of conduct which he should adopt, but even composed in his head a letter to be sent to his wife. When he reached his Switzer's room, he glanced at the official papers and letters which had been brought from the ministry, and ordered them to be brought into the library. "Shut the door, and let no one in," he said in reply to a question of the Swiss, emphasizing the last words, "Ni prinamment," let no one in, with some satisfaction, which was an evident sign that he was in a better state of mind. Alexey Alexandrovitch walked up and down the library once or twice, and then, coming to his huge writing table, on which his lackey, before going out, had placed 6 lighted candles, he cracked his fingers and sat down, and began to examine his writing materials. Then, leaning his elbow on the table, he bent his head to one side, and after a moment of reflection, he began to write without the slightest hesitancy. He wrote in French without addressing her by name, employing the pronoun vous, which has less coldness than the corresponding Russian word vieux has. He wrote, "At our recent interview I expressed the intention of communicating to you my resolution concerning the subject of our conversation. Having carefully taken everything into consideration, I am writing now with the view of fulfilling my promise. This is my decision. Whatever your conduct may have been, I do not acknowledge that you have the right to break the bonds which a power supreme has consecrated. The family cannot be broken up through a caprice, an arbitrary act, even through the crime of one of the parties, and our lives must remain unchanged. This must be so for my sake, for your sake, for the sake of our son. I am fully persuaded that you have been repentant, that you still feel repentant for the deed that obliges me to write to you, that you will cooperate with me in destroying root and branch the cause of our estrangement and in forgetting the past. In case this be not so, you yourself must understand what awaits you and your son. In regard to all this, I hope to have a more specific conversation at a personal interview. As the summer season is nearly over, I beg of you to come back to Petersburg as soon as possible, and certainly not later than Tuesday. All the necessary measures for your return hither will be taken. I beg you to take notice that I attach a very peculiar importance to your attention to my request. A. Karenina. P.S. I enclose in this letter money, which you may need at this particular time." He reread his letter, and was satisfied with it, especially with the fact that he had thought of sending the money. There was not an angry word, not a reproach, neither was there any condescension in it. The essential thing was the golden bridge for their reconciliation. He folded his letter, smoothed it with a huge paper cutter of massive ivory, enclosed it in an envelope together with the money, and rang the bell, feeling that sense of satisfaction which the use of his well-ordered, perfect epistolary arrangements always gave him. "Give this letter to the courier for delivery to Anna Arkadyevna at the Dacha to-morrow," he said, and arose. "I will obey your Excellency. Will you have tea here in the library?" Alexey Alexandrovitch ordered tea brought to him in the library, and then, still playing with the paper cutter, he went toward his armchair, near which were a shaded lamp and a French work on cuneiform inscriptions which he had begun. Above the chair, in an oval gilt frame, hung a portrait of Anna, the excellent work of a distinguished painter. Alexey Alexandrovitch looked at it. The eyes, as inscrutable as they had been on the evening of their attempted explanation, looked down at him ironically and insolently. Everything about this remarkable portrait seemed to Alexey Alexandrovitch insupportably insolent and provoking, from the black lace on her head and her dark hair, to the white, beautiful hand and the ring finger covered with jeweled rings. After gazing at this portrait for a moment, Alexey Alexandrovitch shuddered, his lips trembled, and with a "Brr!" he turned away. Hastily sitting down in his armchair, he opened his book. He tried to read, but he could not regain the keen interest which he had felt before in the cuneiform inscriptions. His eyes looked at the book, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking, not of his wife, but of a complication which had recently arisen in important matters connected with his official activity, and which at present formed the chief interest of his service. He felt that he was more deeply than ever plunged into this complicated affair, and that he could without self-conceit claim that the idea which had originated in his brain was bound to disentangle the whole difficulty, to confirm him in his official career, to put down his enemies, and thus enable him to do a signal service to the state. As soon as his servant had brought him the tea and left the room, Alexey Alexandrovitch got up and went to his writing table. Pushing to the center of it a portfolio which contained papers relating to this affair, he seized a pencil from the stand, and, with a faintly sarcastic smile of self-satisfaction, buried himself in the perusal of the documents relative to the complicated business under consideration. The complication was as follows. The distinguishing trait of Alexey Alexandrovitch as a government official, the one characteristic trait peculiar to him alone, though it must mark every progressive chinovnik, the trait which had contributed to his success no less than his eager ambition, his moderation, his uprightness, and his self-confidence, was his detestation of red tape, and his sincere desire to avoid, as far as he could, unnecessary writing, and to go straight on in accomplishing needful business with all expedition and economy. It happened that, in the famous commission of the 14th of June, a project was mooted for the irrigation of the fields in the government of Zhurai, which formed a part of Alexey Alexandrovitch's jurisdiction, and this project offered a striking example of the few results obtained by official correspondence and expenditure. Alexey Alexandrovitch knew that it was a worthy object. The matter of the irrigation of the fields in the government of Zhurai had come to him by inheritance from his predecessor in the ministry, and, in fact, had already cost much money and brought no results. When Alexey Alexandrovitch entered the ministry, he had perceived this, and had wanted immediately to put his hand to this work, but at first he did not feel himself strong enough, and perceived that it touched too many interests, and was imprudent, and afterward, having become involved in other matters, he entirely forgot about it. The fertilization of the Zhurai fields, like all things, went in its own way by force of inertia. Many people got their living through it, and one family in particular, a very agreeable and musical family, all of the daughters of which played on stringed instruments. Alexey Alexandrovitch knew this family, and had been nuptial godfather when one of the elder daughters was married. The opposition to this affair, raised by his enemies in another branch of the ministry, was unjust, in the opinion of Alexey Alexandrovitch, because in every ministry there are similar cases which by a well-known rule of official etiquette no one ever bothers himself about. But now, since they had thrown down the gauntlet, he had boldly accepted the challenge and asked for the appointment of a special commission for examining and verifying the labors of the commissioners on the fertilization of the Zhurai fields. And this did not prevent him from also keeping these gentlemen busy in other ways. He had also demanded a special commission for investigating the status and organization of the foreign populations. This last question had likewise been raised by the commission of June 14th, and was energetically supported by Alexey Alexandrovitch, on the ground that no delay should be allowed in relieving the deplorable situation of these alien tribes. In committee this matter gave rise to the most lively discussions among the ministries. The ministry hostile to Alexey Alexandrovitch proved that the position of the foreign populations was perfectly flourishing, that to meddle with them would be to injure their well-being, and that, if any fault could be found in regard to the matter, it was due to the neglect of Alexey Alexandrovitch and his ministry in not carrying out the measures prescribed by law. Now Alexey Alexandrovitch had made up his mind to demand, first, the appointment of a new committee, whose duty should be to study on the spot the condition of the foreign populations. Secondly, in case their condition should be found such as the official data in the hands of the committee represented, that a new scientific commission should be sent to study into the causes of this sad state of things, with the aim of settling it from the A. Political, B. Administrative, C. Economical, D. Ethnographical, E. Physical, and F. Religious point of view. Thirdly, that the hostile ministry should be required to furnish the particulars in regard to the measures taken during the last 10 years to relieve the wretched situation in which these tribes were placed. And fourthly and finally, that this ministry should explain the fact that they had acted in absolute contradiction to the fundamental and organic law, volume T, page 18, with reference to article 36, as was proved by an act of the committee under numbers 17015 and 18308 of the 17th of December, 1863, and the 19th of June, 1864. A flush of animation covered Alexey Alexandrovitch's face as he rapidly wrote down for his own use a digest of these thoughts. After he had covered a sheet of paper, he rang a bell, and sent a messenger to the director of the chancellery, asking for a few data which were missing. Then he got up, and began to walk up and down the room, looking again at the portrait with a frown and a scornful smile. Then he resumed his book about the cuneiform inscriptions, and found that his interest of the evening before had come back to him. He went to bed about 11 o'clock, and as he lay, still awake, he passed in review the affair with his wife, and it no longer appeared to him in the same gloomy aspect. Though Anna had obstinately and angrily contradicted Vronsky when he told her that her position was impossible, yet in the bottom of her heart she felt that it was false and dishonorable, and she longed with all her soul to escape from it. When, in a moment of agitation, she avowed all to her husband as they were returning from the races, notwithstanding the pain which it cost her, she felt glad. After Alexey Alexandrovitch left her, she kept repeating to herself that she was glad, and now all was explained, and that henceforth there would be at least no more need of falsehood and deception. It seemed to her indubitable that now her possession would be henceforth determined. It might be bad, but it would be definite, and there would be an end to lying and equivocation. The pain which her words had cost her husband and herself would have its compensation, she thought, in the fact that now all would be definite. That very evening Vronsky came to see her, but she did not tell him what had taken place between her husband and herself, although it was needful to tell him in order that the affair might be definitely settled. The next morning, when she awoke, her first memory was of the words that she had spoken to her husband, and they seemed to her so odious that she could not imagine now how she could have brought herself to say such strange brutal words, and she could not conceive what the result of them would be. But the words were irrevocable, and Alexey Alexandrovitch had departed without replying. I have seen Vronsky since, and I did not tell him. Even at the moment he went away, I wanted to hold him back and tell him, but I postponed it because I felt how strange it was that I did not tell him at the first moment. Why did I have the desire, and yet not speak? And, in reply to this question, the hot flush of shame kindled in her face. She realized that it was shame that kept her from speaking. Her position, which the evening before had seemed to her so clear, suddenly presented itself as very far from clear, as inextricable. She began to fear the dishonor about which she had not thought before. When she considered what her husband might do to her, the most terrible ideas came to her mind. It occurred to her that at any instant the steward might appear to drive her out of house and home, and that her shame might be proclaimed to all the world. She asked herself where she could go if they drove her from home, and she found no answer. When she thought of Vronsky, she imagined that he did not love her, and that he was already beginning to tire of her, and that she could not impose herself on him, and she felt angry with him. It seemed to her that the words which she spoke to her husband, and which she incessantly repeated to herself, were spoken so that everybody could hear them, and had heard them. She could not bring herself to look into the faces of those with whom she lived. She could not bring herself to ring for her maid, and still less to go down and meet her son and his governess. The maid came, and stood long at the door, listening. Finally she decided to go to her without a summons. Anna looked at her questioningly, and in her terror she blushed. The maid apologized for coming, saying that she thought she heard the bell. She brought a gown and a note. The note was from Betsy. Betsy reminded her that Lisa Merkolova and the Baroness Stolz, with their adorers, Kaluzhki and the old man Stremov, were coming to her house that morning for a game of croquet. "Come and look on, please, as a study of manners. I shall expect you," was the conclusion of the note. Anna read the letter and sighed profoundly. "Nothing, nothing. I need nothing," she said to Annushka, who was arranging the brushes and toilet articles on her dressing table. "Go away. I will dress myself immediately and come down. I need nothing." Annushka went out, yet Anna did not begin to dress, but sat in the same attitude, with bent head and folded hands, and occasionally she would shiver and begin to make some gesture, to say something, and then fall back into listlessness again. She kept saying "Bose-moi, Bose-moi," but the words had no meaning in her mind. The thought of seeking a refuge from her situation in religion, although she never doubted the faith in which she had been trained, seemed to her as strange as to go and ask help of Alexey Alexandrovitch himself. She knew beforehand that the refuge offered by religion was possible only by the absolute renunciation of all that constituted for her the meaning of life. She suffered, and was frightened besides, by a sensation that was new to her experience hitherto, and which seemed to take possession of her inmost soul. She seemed to feel double, just as sometimes eyes, when weary, see double. She knew not what she feared, what she desired. She knew not whether she feared and desired what had passed, or what was to come, and what she desired she did not know. "Oh, what am I doing?" she cried, suddenly feeling a pain in both temples, and she discovered that she had taken her hair into her two hands and was pulling it. She got up and began to walk the floor. "The coffee is served, and Mam'selle and Seroza are waiting," said Annushka, coming in again and finding her mistress in the same condition as before. "Seroza? What is Seroza doing?" suddenly asked Anna, remembering for the first time that morning the existence of her son. "He has been naughty, I think," said Annushka with a smile. "How naughty?" "You had some peaches in the corner cupboard. He took one and ate it on the sly, it seems." The thought of her son suddenly called Anna from the impassive state in which she had been sunk. She remembered the partly sincere, though somewhat exaggerated, rôle of devoted mother, which she had taken on herself for a number of years, and she felt with joy that in this relationship she had a standpoint independent of her relation to her husband and Vronsky. This standpoint was her son. In whatever situation she might be placed, she could not give him up. Her husband might drive her from him and put her to shame. Vronsky might turn his back on her and resume his former independent life, and here again she thought of him with a feeling of anger and reproach. But she could not leave her son. She had an aim in life, and she must act so as to safeguard this relation toward her son, so that they could not take him from her. She must act as speedily as possible before they took him from her. She must take her son and go off. That was the one thing which she now had to do. She must calm herself and get away from this tormenting situation. The very thought of an action having reference to her son, and of going away with him anywhere, already gave her consolation. She dressed in haste, went downstairs, and with firm steps entered the drawing room, where, as usual, she found lunch ready, and Seroza and the governess waiting for her. Seroza, all in white, was standing near a table under the mirror, with the expression of concentrated attention which she knew so well, and in which he resembled his father. Bending over, he was busy with some flowers which he had brought in. The governess had a very stern expression. Seroza, as soon as he saw his mother, uttered a sharp cry, which was a frequent custom of his. "Ah, mamma!" Then he stopped. undecided whether to throw down the flowers and run to his mother and let the flowers go, or to finish his bouquet and take it to her. The governess bowed, and began a long and circumstantial account of the naughtiness that Seroza had committed, but Anna did not hear her. She was thinking whether she should take her with them. "No, I will not," she decided. "I will go alone with my son." "Yes, that was very naughty," said Anna, and taking the boy by the shoulder, she looked with a gentle, not angry, face at the confused but happy boy, and kissed him. "Leave him with me," she said to the wondering governess, and not letting go his arm, she sat down at the table where the coffee was waiting. "Mamma, I didn't," stammered Seroza, trying to judge by his mother's expression what fate was in store for him for having pilfered the peach. "Seroza," she said, as soon as the governess had left the room, "that was naughty. You will not do it again, will you? Do you love me?" She felt that the tears were standing in her eyes. "Why can I not love him?" she asked herself, studying the boy's frightened and yet happy face. "And can he join with his father to punish me? Will he not have pity on me?" The tears began to course down her face, and, in order to hide them, she rose up quickly, and hastened, almost ran, to the terrace. Clear, cool weather had succeeded the stormy rains of the last few days. In spite of the warm sun which shone on the thick foliage of the trees, it was cool in the shade. She shivered both from the coolness and from the sentiment of fear which in the cool air seized her with new force. "Go and find Marietta," she said to Seroza, who had followed her, and then she began to walk up and down on the straw carpet which covered the terrace. "Will they not forgive me?" she asked herself. "Will they not understand that all this could not possibly have been otherwise?" As she stopped and looked at the top of the aspens waving in the wind, with their freshly washed leaves glittering brightly in the cool sunbeams, it seemed to her that they would not forgive her, that everything would be as pitiless toward her as that sky and that foliage. And again she felt that mysterious sense in her inmost soul that she was in a dual state. "I must not think," she said to herself. "I must have courage. Where shall I go? When? Whom shall I take? Yes, to Moscow by the evening train, with Annushka and Seroza, and only the most necessary things. But first I must write to them both." She hurried back into the house to her boudoir, sat down at the table, and wrote to her husband. "After what has passed, I can no longer remain in your house. I am going away, and I shall take my son. I do not know the laws, and so I do not know with which of his parents the child should remain. But I take him with me, because I cannot live without him. Be magnanimous. Let me have him." Up to this point she wrote rapidly and naturally. But this appeal to a magnanimity which she had never seen in him, and the need of ending her letter with something affecting, brought her to a halt. "I cannot speak of my fault and my repentance, because—" and again she stopped, unable to find the right words to express her thoughts. "No," she said, "nothing more is necessary," and tearing up this letter she began another, from which she left out any appeal to his generosity, and sealed it. She had to write a second letter to Vronsky. "I have confessed to my husband," she began, and she sat long wrapped in thought, without being able to write more. That was so coarse, so unfeminine. "And then, what can I write to him?" she asked herself. Again the crimson of shame mantled her face as she remembered how calm he was, and she felt so vexed with him that she tore the sheet of paper with its one phrase into bits. "I cannot write," she said to herself, and closing her desk she went upstairs, told the governess and the domestics that she was going to Moscow that evening, and instantly began to make her preparations. In all the rooms of the villa, the men servants, the gardeners, the lackeys, were hurrying about laden with various things. Cupboards and commodes were cleared of their contents. Twice they had gone to the shop for packing cord. On the floor lay piles of newspapers. 2 trunks, traveling bags, and a bundle of plaids had been carried into the anteroom. A carriage and 2 cabs were waiting at the front door. Anna, who in the haste of packing had somewhat forgotten her inward anguish, was standing by her table in her boudoir and packing her bag, when Annushka called her attention to the rumble of a carriage approaching the house. Anna looked out of the window and saw on the steps Alexey Alexandrovitch's messenger boy ringing the front bell. "Go and see what it is," said she, and then sat down in her chair and, folding her hands on her knees, waited with calm resignation. A lackey brought her a fat packet directed in Alexey Alexandrovitch's handwriting. "The messenger was ordered to wait and answer," said he. "Very well," she replied, and as soon as he left the room she opened the packet with trembling fingers. A roll of fresh, new banknotes in a wrapper fell out first. She unfolded the letter and began to read it at the end. "All the necessary measures for your return hither will be taken. I attach my very particular importance to your attention to my request," she read. She ran it through hastily backwards a second time, read it all through, and then she read it again from beginning to end. When she had finished it, she felt chilled, and had the consciousness that some terrible and unexpected misfortune was crushing her. That very morning she had regretted her confession to her husband, and desired nothing so much as that she had not spoken those words, and this letter treated her words as if they had not been spoken, gave her what she desired, and yet it seemed to her more cruel than anything that she could have imagined. "Right, he is right," she murmured. "Of course, he is always right. He is a Christian. He is magnanimous. Yes, the low, vile man. No one understands. No one knows him but me, and I cannot explain it. People say, he is a religious, moral, honorable, intellectual man, but they have not seen what I have seen. They do not know how for 8 years he has crushed my life, crushed everything that was vital in me, how he has never once thought of me as a living woman who needed love. They do not know how at every step he has insulted me, and yet remained self-satisfied. Have I not striven with all my powers to find a justification of my life? Have I not done my best to love him, to love his son when I could not love my husband? But the time came when I found I could no longer deceive myself, that I am a living being, that I am not to blame, that God has made me so, and that I must love and live. And now what? He might kill me. He might kill him, and I could endure it. I could forgive it. But no, why should I have not foreseen what he would do? He does exactly in accordance with his despicable character. He stands on his rights. But I, poor unfortunate, am sunk lower and more irreclaimably than ever toward ruin. You may surmise what awaits you and your son," she repeated to herself, remembering a sentence in his letter. "It is a threat that he means to rob me of my son, and doubtless their wretched laws allow it. But do I not see why he said that? He has no belief in my love for my son, or else he is deriding, as he always does, in his sarcastic manner, is deriding this feeling of mine, for he knows that I will not abandon my son. I cannot abandon him, that without my son life would be insupportable, even with him whom I love, and that to abandon my son, and leave him, I should fall like the worst of women. This he knows, and knows that I should never have the power to do so. Our lives must remain unchanged," she continued, remembering another sentence in the letter. "This life was a torture before, but of late it has grown worse than ever. What will it be now? And he knows all this, knows that I cannot repent because I breathe, because I love. He knows that nothing except falsehood and deceit can result from this, but he must needs prolong my torture. I know him, and I know that he swims in perjury like a fish in water. But no, I will not give him this pleasure. I will break this network of lies in which he wants to enwrap me. Come what may, anything is better than lies and deception. But how? Pose-moi. Was there ever a woman so unhappy as I? No, I will break it. I will break it!" she cried, springing to her feet and striving to keep back the tears. And she went to her writing table to begin another letter to him. But in the lowest depths of her soul she felt that she had not the power to break the network of circumstances, that she had not the power to escape from the situation in which she was placed, false and dishonorable though it was. She sat down at the table, but instead of writing, she folded her arms on the table, and bowed her head on them, and began to weep like a child, with heaving breast and convulsive sobs. She wept because her visions about an explanation, about a settlement of her position, had vanished for ever. She knew that now all things would go on as before, and even worse than before. She felt that her position in society, which she had slighted, and even that morning counted as dross, was dear to her, that she should never have the strength to abandon it for the shameful position of a woman who has deserted her husband and son and joined her lover. She felt that in spite of all her efforts, she could never be stronger than herself. She never would know what freedom to love meant, but would be always a guilty woman, constantly under the threat of detection, deceiving her husband for the disgraceful society of an independent stranger, with whose life she could never join hers. She knew that this would be so, and yet at the same time it was so terrible that she could not acknowledge, even to herself, how it would end. And she wept, unrestrainedly as a child who has been punished sobs. The steps of a lackey approaching brought her to herself, and hiding from him her face, she pretended to be writing. "The courier would like his answer," said the lackey. "His answer? Oh, yes," said Anna. "Let him wait. I will ring." "What can I write?" she asked herself. "How decide by myself alone? What do I know? What do I want? Whom do I love?" Again it seemed to her that in her soul she felt the dual nature. She was alarmed at this feeling, and seized on the first pretext for activity that presented itself, so that she might be freed from thoughts about herself. "I must see Alexey." Thus in thought she called Vronsky. "He alone can tell me what I must do. I will go to Betsy's. Perhaps I shall find him there." She completely forgot that on the evening before, when she told him that she was not going to the Princess Tverskaya's, he said that in that case he should not go there either. She went to the table again, and wrote her husband. "I have received your letter. A." She rang and gave it to the lackey. "We are not going," she said to Anushka, who was just coming in. "Not going at all?" "No, but don't unpack before tomorrow, and have the carriage wait. I am going to the princess's." "What gown shall you wear?" The croquet party to which the Princess Tverskaya invited Anna was to consist of 2 ladies and their adorers. These 2 ladies were the leading representatives of a new and exclusive Petersburg clique, called, in imitation of an imitation, les 7 merveilles du monde, the 7 wonders of the world. Both of them belonged to the highest society, but to a circle absolutely hostile to that in which Anna moved. Moreover, old Stremov, one of the influential men of the city, and Lisa Merkolov's lover, was in the service of Alexey Alexandrovitch's enemies. From all these considerations Anna did not care to go to Betsy's, and her refusal called forth the hints in the Princess Tverskaya's note. But now she decided to go, hoping to find Vronsky there. She reached the Princess Tverskaya's before the other guests. Just as she arrived, Vronsky's lackey, with his well-combed side whiskers, like a kammerjunker, was at the door. Raising his cap, he stepped inside to let her pass. Anna recognized him, and only then remembered that Vronsky had told her that he was not coming. Undoubtedly he had sent him with his excuses. As she was taking off her wraps in the anteroom, she heard the lackey, who rolled his R's like a kammerjunker, say, "From the count to the princess." At the same time he delivered his note. She wanted to ask him where his baron was. She wanted to go back and write him a note asking him to come to her, or to go and find him herself. But she could not follow out any of these plans, for the bell had already announced her presence, and one of the princess's lackeys was waiting at the door to usher her into the rooms beyond. "The princess is in the garden. Word has been sent to her. Would you not like to step into the garden?" said a second lackey in the second room. Her position of uncertainty, of darkness, was just the same as at home. It was even worse, because she could not make any decision. She could not see Vronsky, and she was obliged to remain in the midst of a company of strangers diametrically opposed to her present mood. She wore a toilet which she knew was very becoming. She was not alone, she was surrounded by that solemn atmosphere of indolence so familiar. And on the whole it was better to be there than at home. She was not obliged to think what she would do. Things would arrange themselves. Betsy came to meet her in a white toilet absolutely stunning in its elegance, and Anna greeted her, as usual, with a smile. The Princess Tverskaya was accompanied by Tushkevitch and a young relative who, to the great delight of the provincial family to which she belonged, was spending the summer with the famous princess. Apparently there was something unnatural in Anna's appearance, for Betsy immediately remarked it. "I did not sleep well," replied Anna, looking furtively at the lackey, who was coming, as she supposed, to bring Vronsky's note to the princess. "How glad I am that you came!" said Betsy. "I am just up, and should like to have a cup of tea before the others come. And you," she said, addressing Tushkevitch, "had better go with Maska and try the croquet ground, which has just been clipped. You and I will have time for a little confidential talk while taking our tea. We'll have a cosy chat, won't we?" she added, in English, addressing Anna with a smile, and taking her hand, in which she held a sunshade. "All the more willingly because I cannot stay long. I must call on old Verdi. I have been promising for 100 years to come and see her," said Anna, to whom the lie, though contrary to her nature, seemed not only simple and easy, but even pleasurable. Why she said a thing which she forgot the second after, she herself could not have told. She said it at haphazard, so that, in case Vronsky were not coming, she might have a way of escape, and try to find him elsewhere. And why she happened to select the name of old Fräulein Vrede rather than any other of her acquaintances was likewise inexplicable. But, as events proved, out of all possible schemes for meeting Vronsky, she could not have chosen better. "No, I shall not let you go," replied Betsy, scrutinizing Anna's face. "Indeed, if I were not so fond of you, I should be tempted to be vexed with you. Anybody would think that you are afraid of my company compromising you. Tea in the little parlor, if you please," she said to the lackey, blinking her eyes as was habitual with her, and taking the letter from him, she began to read it. "Alexey disappoints us," she said in French. "He writes that he cannot come," she added, in a tone as simple and unaffected as if it had never entered her mind that Vronsky was of any more interest to Anna than as a possible partner in a game of croquet. Anna knew that Betsy knew all, but, as she heard Betsy speak of Vronsky now, she almost brought herself to believe for a moment that she knew nothing. "Ah," she said indifferently, as if it was a detail which did not interest her. "How," she continued, still smiling, "could your society compromise anyone?" This manner of playing with words, this hiding a secret, had a great charm for Anna, as it had for all women. And it was not the necessity of secrecy, or the reason for secrecy, but the process itself, that gave the pleasure. "I cannot be more Catholic than the Pope," she said. "Stremoff and Lisa Merkaloff, they are the cream of society. They are received everywhere. But she laid special stress on the I have never been severe and intolerant. I simply have not had time." "No, but perhaps you prefer not to meet Stremoff. Let him break lances with Alexey Alexandrovitch in committee hearings. That does not concern us. But in society he is a lovely man, as I know, and a passionate lover of croquet. But you shall see him. And you must see how admirably he conducts himself in his ridiculous position as Liza's aged lover. He is very charming. Don't you know Sappho Stolz? She is the latest, absolutely the latest style." While Betsy was saying all this, Anna perceived, by her joyous, intelligent eyes, that she saw her embarrassment and was trying to put her at her ease. They had gone into the little boudoir. "By the way, I must write a word to Alexey." And Betsy sat down at her writing table, hastily penned a few lines, and enclosed them in an envelope. "I wrote him to come to dinner. One of the ladies who is going to be here has no gentleman. See if I am imperative enough. Excuse me if I leave you a moment. Please seal it and direct it," she said, at the door. "I have some arrangements to make." Without a moment's hesitation Anna took Betsy's seat at the table, and, without reading her note, added these words: "I must see you without fail. Come to the Brady's garden. I will be there at 6 o'clock." She sealed the letter, and Betsy, coming in a moment later, dispatched it at once. The two ladies took their tea at the little table in the cool boudoir, and had indeed a very cosy chat, as the princess had promised, until the arrival of her guests. They expressed their judgments on them, beginning with Lisa Merkaloff. "She is very charming, and she has always been congenial to me," said Anna. "You ought to like her. She adores you. Yesterday evening, after the races, she came to see me, and was in despair not to find you. She says you are a genuine heroine of a romance, and that if she were a man she would commit 1,000 follies for your sake. Stremov told her she did that, even as she was." "But please, tell me one thing I could never understand," said Anna, after a moment of silence, and in a tone which clearly showed that she did not ask an idle question, but that what she wanted explained was more important to her than would appear. "Please tell me, what are the relations between her and Prince Kalusky, the man they call Mishka? I've rarely seen them together. What are their relations?" A smile came into Betsy's eyes, and she looked keenly at Anna. "It's a new kind," she replied. "All the ladies have adopted it. They've thrown their caps behind the mill. But there are ways, and ways, of throwing them." "Yes, but what are her relations with Kalusky?" Betsy, to Anna's surprise, broke into a gale of irresistible laughter, which was an unusual thing with her. "But you are trespassing on the Princess Myakaya's province. It is the question of an enfant terrible," said Betsy, trying in vain to restrain her gaiety, but again breaking out into that contagious laughter which is the peculiarity of people who rarely laugh. "But you must ask them," she at length managed to say, with the tears running down her cheeks. "Well, you laugh," said Anna, in spite of herself joining in her friend's amusement, "but I never could understand it at all, and I don't understand what part the husband plays." "The husband? Lisa Merkaloff's husband carries her plaid for her, and is always at her beck and call. But the real meaning of the affair no one cares to know. You know that in good society people don't speak, and don't even think of certain details of the toilet. Well, it is the same here." "Are you going to Rolandaki's fête?" asked Anna, to change the conversation. "I don't think so," replied Betsy, and not looking at her companion, she carefully poured the fragrant tea into their little transparent cups. Then, having handed one to Anna, she rolled a cigarette, and, putting it into a silver holder, she began to smoke. "You see, I am in a fortunate position," she began seriously, holding her cup in her hand. "I understand you, and I understand Lisa. Lisa is one of these naive, childlike natures, who cannot distinguish between ill and good. At least, she was so when she was young, and now she knows that this simplicity is becoming to her. Now perhaps she purposely fails to understand the distinction," said Betsy with a sly smile. "But all the same it becomes her. You see, it is quite possible to look on things from a tragic standpoint, and to get torment out of them. And it is quite possible to look on it simply, and even gaily. Possibly you are inclined to look on things too tragically." "How I should like to know others as well as I know myself," said Anna, with a serious and pensive look. "Am I worse than others, or better? Worse, I think." "You are an enfant terrible, was Betsy's comment. But here they are.